Good morning to everyone on the call. We will begin our webinar. This webinar is the JohnsonOMalley Tribal Consultation session that is scheduled at 9 o'clock Mountain Time today. This session is being recorded. Before we begin, I'd like to go over a few logistical notes. Please allow BIE to complete the entire presentation, and then we will ask for comments. Also, please type your name and who you are representing in the chat box. And there's a message in the chat box currently, which also asks you to do the same thing. My name is Maureen Lesky. I'm with the Bureau of Indian Education. I'm the program manager for the Office of Sovereignty in Indian Education. And I would like Miss Angela Barnett to introduce herself.
I'm muted.
Hi, Miss Barnett, you should be able to talk now.
This is Angela Barnett. I'm the program specialist for JOM. My office is located at the Oklahoma Area Education Office in Oklahoma City.
Thank you. We'll turn it over to Mr. Clint Bowers at this time to give an opening.
Hello, everyone. This is Clint Bowers from Bureau of Indian Education Central Office here in Washington, D.C. I want to welcome you to the consultation and webinar and really provide us some input. So Maureen and Angela will take this time to provide some good input on the program and how we're looking at reforming the program based on the consultation and comments that you all provide. We really value your input from here. We'll make sure and move forward with the consultation report to show how your comments, as well as those comments provided at live in-person consultations, were included or reasons why they were excluded from moving forward with the reform process and modernization of the JohnsonOMalley program. We really want to take this time to thank you for joining and providing this input. It's invaluable in terms of providing insights on how we should look at improving programs that really provide services and supplemental supports to our students in public schools. Thanks for joining. On behalf of the BIE, Director Dearman, the Assistant Secretary for Indian Affairs, Tara Sweeney, and everyone at the department, thank you for joining the consultation today, and we look forward to addressing your concerns, any comments you may have, as well as providing you time frames for when the record will close for comments and next steps. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Clint. All right, can you all still hear me? I have muted the other callers, so we will not hear background noise. Can you hear me?
Maureen, I can hear you.
Okay, thank you. All right, thank you for that. We're going to move on to the agenda. I do have everyone muted at this time to prevent background noise. If you need to type in the chat box, please do so. Just a quick reminder to please type in your name and who you are representing in the chat box for our records. Looking at the agenda slide, we're going to talk about the following topics in this order. We will first begin by reviewing the JohnsonOMalley Authority. We will briefly discuss the JohnsonOMalley Modernization Act. And then we will move on into our first topic, which is the definition of eligible Indian student. The second topic will be the funding formula. The third topic will be other reconciliation and modernization, also the proposed rule. Then we will provide some additional information about the JOM website, the BIE JOM website, and some of the deadlines for the comment period. And then at that time, we will ask for comments. Advancing to the next slide. As you all are aware, I'm sure, the JohnsonOMalley, the original JohnsonOMalley Act was passed in 1934, and the purpose of the act was to provide for the educational needs of Indian students. And as you also probably know, it authorizes the Interior to enter into contracts with states, schools, private non-sectarian organizations, tribes, and tribal organizations. Also, continuing on, in 1955, BIA established regulations. 1975, BIE updated the regulations, which are now 25 CFR Part 273. And then most recently, at the end of 2018, Congress updated the JohnsonOMalley Act, and it is now called the JohnsonOMalley Supplemental Indian Education Program Modernization Act, and we often say Modernization Act for short, and it also became Public Law 115-404. So right now at this time, we are proposing changes to 25 CFR to implement the new Modernization Act. So the next item, the Modernization Act itself, we will talk a little bit about what that directs Interior to do. So one of the things that the new act requires Interior to do is to make an initial determination of the number of eligible Indian students served or potentially served by each eligible entity. So that will be discussed in more detail in a preliminary report. The preliminary report will be published on the BIE JOM website, and then there will be a comment period on the preliminary report. And then at the end of the year in December, a final report, which will include the information in the preliminary report on the initial determination of the number of eligible Indian students, will be part of that final report. And just as a side note, if you're interested in looking at some of the numbers that were researched regarding the initial determination, you can look at the BIE JOM website and look for the previous consultation PowerPoint, which looked at some various data sources such as Census, Department of Ed, NCES, National Center on Educational Statistics, and then some of our current contractor data. And then going back to the Modernization Act, it also requires BIE in subsequent years. So right now, this is an implementation, first-year implementation year, and in subsequent years, it will be required that contracting parties report their the number of eligible students served, which we often refer to as a student count, a BIE JOM student count. And then also there is a requirement to prepare an annual report on the number of eligible Indian students served, make recommendations on funding levels, and also to have an assessment of the contracts. So that'll be all discussed in an annual report at the end of the year. So continuing on with the Modernization Act, another requirement for Interior is to complete a rule by December 31st of this year. And part of that includes determining how the regulatory definition of eligible Indian student may be revised to clarify eligibility requirements. Also, determine as necessary how the funding formula may be clarified and revised. And lastly, otherwise reconcile and modernize the rules to align with what is happening today. So as we mentioned earlier in an earlier slide, the last changes were made in 1975. And later in the presentation, we'll go over some of those proposed changes. So that is a brief overview of the JOM authority and then also the Modernization Act. And now we will transition into our first topic, which is the definition of eligible Indian student. With the first topic of eligible Indian student, in 273.12 and CFR 273.12, it states that students must be 1/4 or more degree Indian blood and recognized by the Secretary as being eligible for Bureau services. So you see the "and" there is in bold font. That's important to remember, the "and." What happened later in 1990, a U.S. District Court decided that the eligibility criteria was too strict, and so there was a memorandum issued in 1991 that changes the word "and" that we just read at the top of the slide, and it changes that word to an "or." So now what the memorandum says to be eligible for JOM services is that a student must be a member of, or at least 1/4 degree Indian blood descendant of, a member of an Indian tribe, and then also it says reside on or near an Indian reservation. So that word "and" became "or." And then moving on into 2015, BIE held a consultation to look at different options to revise eligibility. So at that time, there was a proposed rule that would require membership in a federally recognized tribe, which would delete eligibility for those who are not members but have 1/4 or more degree Indian blood. So at the time, of March 2018, it was decided that there would be no action taken and wait and see if the Modernization Act passed, which it did. And then at the time, it was decided that the proposed rule would establish eligibility for any student who is a member of a tribe or a fourth degree Indian blood or more. So now the current proposal is there at the bottom of the slide: establish eligibility for any student who is a member of a federally recognized tribe or at least 1/4 degree Indian blood descendant of a member of a federally recognized tribe. And then the next slide really says the same thing, but it shows the exact wording in the proposed 273-112, which at the bottom it also says what I just said earlier, that a student would need to be at least 1/4 degree Indian blood descendant of a descendant of a member of a federally recognized tribe or a member of a federally recognized tribe. So that's the current criteria. And then to be eligible for JohnsonOMalley services, it also adds from age 3 years through grades 12 and not enrolled in a bureau or sectarian operated school. So that is the first topic, the definition of eligible Indian student. And now we're going to move into the second topic, which is the funding formula. And that will be presented by Ms. Angela Barnett. And Ms. Barnett, give me a chance to unmute you, and then you can begin. All right, Angela, can you say something so I can see if you got your microphone on?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, the second topic is the funding formula. The current rules funding formula is, the funding formula is the number of eligible Indian students multiplied by 25% of which is higher, the state average per pupil operating cost or the national average per pupil operating cost. However, this is different from what the formula BIE has been using since 1988. Since 1988, BIE has been using a JOM funding formula that relies on data from the U.S. Department of Education on the state annual cost per pupil and the national annual cost per pupil to determine a weight factor. The weight factor is then used to calculate the funding. So as you can see on the slide, the 25% of weight factor times the number of eligible Indian students, weight factor is the higher of either the state or the national. And the example is the state average has 11,500 and the national average cost is 13,000. So in the example, since the national is higher than the state, then the national is going to be used in this example. The 13,000 times 0.25 equals 3,250. And then we're going to, and then from there, 500 eligible students, then the funding would be the 3,250 times 500,000 gives you 1,625,000. However, on the next slide, the Education Amendments of 1978, the PL 95-5621, required the Secretary of Interior to develop an alternative method for the distribution of JOM funds and publish such formula in the Register in 1979. 10 years later, a new formula based upon a 1.3 weight factor would be phased in, and that was phased in over a 3-year period. The Appropriations Act of September 27, 1988, directed the use of a funding formula recommended by AJA to the Committees on Appropriations in a letter dated June 27, 1988. And then the next slide is the JOM Modernization Act requires the BIE to determine as necessary how the funding formula may be clarified and revised to ensure full participation of contracting parties and provide clarity on the funding process. The BIE proposes to revise the funding formula to reflect the formula used since 1988 to ensure full participation of contracting parties. The revised language will provide clarity on what source is used to determine the initial calculations, how the calculation is made to determine a weight factor by state, and how the minimum weight factor is to be used should the calculated weight factor for the state fall below the minimum. The funding formula for contracts will be based on the calculated weight factor and the number of eligible Indian students to be served by the contract. So in this example, the weight factor X times the number of eligible Indian students. So you have the weight factor equal the state over the national. And if 1.3 or higher, then that will be used. But if the weight factor is less than 1.3, then 1.3 will be the weight factor. Again, this data is from the U.S. Department of Education from prior year. And on this slide is doing the actual calculation. So it's putting in the numbers. So the weight factor times the number of eligible Indian students is the state over the national again. And in this example, we have the state, which is 11,500 over the national, which is 13,000. And then you can see in the example where it equals 0.88. So since it's 0.88 and it's less than 1.3, then we're going to use the 1.3. So in the example, if 500 eligible students, the funding equals 1.3 times 500 and equals 650. And that's what's currently being used today. And on the next slide, what we did was we just took different weight factors, and you can see in this example how they differ from 1.3 to 1.4 to 1.5 using the same number of eligible Indian students times the 1.3, using 400, 500, and 600. And you can see in this example on the change that would come about when using different weight factors. And we just put this slide in as an example so that way you could see how that differs. And in this slide right here, this is the hold harmless provision. So the JOM Modernization Act includes a hold harmless provision that remains in effect for 4 years. which states that any existing contracting party may not receive an amount that is less than the amount that the party received for the fiscal year preceding the date of enactment of the Act. After expiration of 4 years, the Act provides that no contractor may receive more than a 10% decrease from the amount received in the prior year. The BAE is not able to recommend a new funding formula without decreasing the funds made available to existing contracting parties. After 4 years, it is possible that existing contractors may receive reduction of funding even beyond the FY 2017 levels. The BIE welcomes comments on this matter for any recommendations on how to revise the funding formula proposed in the rule to support all existing contracting parties receiving funding for JOM programs. And then for 4 years following the date of enactment, the JOM Modernization Act, December 31st, 2018, existing contractors will not receive an amount that is less than the amount received for fiscal year 2017 unless the existing contractor fails to submit a complete annual report. The existing contractor has violated the terms of a contract, or the number of eligible students reported in the annual report has decreased below the number of eligible students served by the existing contractor in the fiscal year 2017. And then after 4 years, no contractor may receive greater than 10% decrease from the amount received in the prior year.
Thank you, Angela. We will begin the slide, the topic 3, other reconciliation and modernization. So the last topic is updating the rule. And so I will highlight some of the proposed changes. And first, I'd like to let you know that the entire proposed rule is on the BIE website. So if you're at a computer, it may be helpful for you to go to the BIE.edu website. You can find the JOM webpage by going to Programs, looking for JOM, or you can type in www.bie.edu/JOM. And under that, or on the web page, there should be a link to the proposed rule, and it will give you all the exact wording. The entire document is there. So for purposes of this webinar, we're going to highlight a few of those revisions. One of the first changes that BIE has to make, or Interior has to make, concerning updating the rule is changing the format into a question-answer format. Another is updating the terminology. And these few changes are because there have been no changes since 1975. So the formatting has changed. The terminology has changed. There's been deletions, revisions, additions of definitions, And then also an update of BIE titles. You may recall that BIE went through a reorganization a few years ago, and as a result, some of the titles in the old rule, some of the titles no longer exist, and so there was a need to update with the current positions. Some of the new definitions that were added is academic year, approving official, awarding official, calendar year, contract, contracting party. I won't list them all, but if you take a look at the proposed rule, there's a section devoted to definitions, and all of the definitions are there. Some of the revisions are there on the slide. There's been some deadline changes. 273.132 revises to reflect the current process of the contract review, and then 0.134 also extends the timeline for approval of contract decisions from 60 days to 90 days. So those are some examples, some of the revisions. And then more are listed on the next slide. There's new sections that have been added. So in 0.120 to 121, there's an approval of the education plan by BIE. 0.154 to 155 talks about when reports are due and consequences of not submitting. 0.156 to 158 provides that BIE will provide technical assistance and training on compliance with reporting requirements to contracting parties. 0.194 establishes that the Indian Education Committee may recommend cancellation of a contract to the appropriate awarding official. 207 to 209 sets out how a contractor may request dispute resolution and sets out how a tribal organization versus another contracting party may request an appeal. So that section's on dispute resolution and appeals. And those are a few examples of some of the changes and the updates that were made. The next slide talks about or shows examples of guiding questions concerning the proposed rule. These are just these are topics to think about as you're coming up with your questions and recommendations. We talked about definition of eligible Indian student, funding formula, some of the proposed rule changes. And then again, for additional information, there is the website www.bie.edu/JOM, or you can also go to the BIA.gov link there provided and click on JohnsonOMalley. Comments on the proposed rule are due August 26, 2019, and you can email those comments to the address provided, consultation@bie.gov. And then there's also the regulations.gov website. You can go to search for JOM and submit comments. Some of the next steps will be to, once the comment period closes, then all of the comments will be reviewed. There will be a final rule that is published in the Federal Register. Now, prior to that, based on the comments, there will be changes made as appropriate, and then the publishing of the final rule in the Federal Register. And then there will be 30 days after that before the final rule becomes effective. And the final rule is due December 31st, 2019. So at this time, we are going to open it up for comments. And before we do that, please give me a few seconds to unmute everyone. And then just another reminder, if you joined later in the webinar, could you please provide your name and the organization you represent? Could you type that into the chat box? And then also, as you make comments during this webinar, also please state your name and who you are representing as you make your comment or ask your question. Hello? I'm sorry, my computer screen turned off. Okay, my computer screen went off, and let's see, I'm trying to get it back going. It looked like it hibernated for a second. I unmuted everyone on the call, so you will hear some background noise. If you could please mute your phone, I think that would be helpful as we ask for comments. Can you please mute your phone? So at this time, we will take comments and questions. Are there any comments or questions?
Maureen?
Yes, please state your name and who you are representing.
Dr. Sherry Johnson, Assistant Wapton Oyate. I'm the Tribal Education Director. I wasn't able to click onto the PowerPoint, but I managed to get a copy of it. The website, I don't know, something's going on with the website. So I clicked into the BIA one and trying to access information and documents from there. So I had a little difficulty there. But I got a couple questions. And so, you know, these changes, we'll make comments and we'll get them to you before August on the due date on there. But for going forward now, the programs that are in existence, what is the expectation of them going forward? Are they going to have to do a reapply form? Are they just rolled over? And then I also have a couple new programs that are interested in having JOM programs. And so how does that look like in the future?
I can start with an answer and then I'll ask my colleagues to also chime in. So as far as we have heard and what we've been told, the programs in existence will not be terminated. It seems to be that it will be status quo, dependent on funding, which we don't know from year to year, but we have not heard anything regarding current programs being affected in terms of having to start over. So if any of my colleagues want to add to that, please feel free. And then I would ask Angela to talk about how she's handling requests for new programs and the data she's collecting for those groups that are interested in applying for a new program.
Maureen, this is Clint. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So to kind of address your question, I know that the intent of the Modernization Act was to hold existing programs harmless. So those existing programs, while we're going through the procedure of updating the student count and going through consultation to see how tribes and existing contractors want to move forward with improving the program, those existing programs won't be affected. But the call of the legislation is also for us to look at potential contractors. So where there's areas of possibly high population density of Native students, you know, it's incumbent on us to try to find where some of those potential contractors might be and try to gauge what that specific need could be in the future in terms of services and funding provided to potential programs and students under the Johnson-o'Malley program.
So Clint, on so the potential programs, is that what the afternoon consultation is going to be about, those people?
I'll defer to Maureen on that, but I think it'll just be another opportunity, right? Because when we did the in-person consultation, we did one specific for tribal leaders and tribes, and then the afternoon session was more for education stakeholders and potential programs as well as existing programs. So I think that's still broken up the same.
That's correct, Clint. This is Maureen. We just divided up the sessions to have one specifically for tribal leaders and tribes, and then another session for the eligible entities. So the folks that are interested who do not currently have a program, you know, they were welcome to join either, but there was not one specifically for those that wanted to begin or start a new program.
Okay, and then I have another question because I have our school, Teoshpazina Tribal School, who has special appropriations for JOM. How does it affect them?
So I believe that the school is previously private, categorized as previously private. Again, we haven't heard in terms of how this will affect all the current grantees. I think Clint said it, and then I said it earlier. We do not believe that there are going to be any changes to the programs that are existing now. And then,
and this is Clint, so that's in the near term. So the hold harmless is while we go through this transition period, but a lot of the changes will be incumbent, and if there are any changes, will be incumbent on what tribes, through consultation, determine what the eligibility requirements end up being, as well as what the funding formula, if the tribes and stakeholders want that to change through their comments during this open comment period. So that'll really determine what the program looks like. And then the idea of the hold harmless is to provide that transition period for those contractors to maintain the status quo. I know there are some stipulations in the legislation that if a contractor doesn't perform reporting or other things, then that hold harmless could sunset. But the idea was that folks would have a transition period to plan for any changes that are based on this modernization period. So I hope that kind of addresses what you were asking.
Somewhat. Thank you, Clint.
Angela, could you? Oh, I'm sorry.
What are the expectations, or are you going to publish them for this year's application and annual report? Where do they go? Who approves? What's the time frame for those?
So the annual report that is mentioned in the Modernization Act, is that the one that you're referring to?
Oh, I probably should call you later. This is for the current year coming up. Our schools need direction, and I don't know. We've seen nothing published, so do we just hold status quo and do what we've always done?
Yeah, I think this would be a good opportunity for Angela to provide some information in terms of the reporting for this current year.
This is Angela. Yes, you will go ahead and continue reporting as you did in the past until we go through this whole modernization and we define where you're going to turn in your reports. Now, you got to also keep in mind is that your contractor that contracts does your contracts for your tribe, they also have a reporting requirement as well. So you're going to have to make sure that you comply with their reporting requirements. And what we're going to try to do is try to work with them and see, if we can, the report that you submit there would be the same report you would submit for the JOM.
I need clarification on boundaries on or near the reservation. Are you specifically doing certain miles? Because we've had some public schools that are near the reservation that would like to apply if possible.
The wording on or near the reservation is not specifically defined in terms of mileage. This is a great time to propose your recommendation on what you think is on or near the reservation. We will take that comment and review your recommendation. As you're thinking of comments and suggestions, I'm scrolling through the chat box to see if there's any information I can provide. To Ms. Mona, will there be another face-to-face meeting regarding this information? not be any more face-to-face tribal consultation sessions. There will be one this afternoon, a webinar this afternoon, and then there will also be a repeat this Thursday, July 25th. Again, there'll be a morning session for tribes and an afternoon session for all other eligible entities. To Miss Sherry Farley's question about the age limit, if you have recommendations to this proposed requirement, you can submit that recommendation. And Miss Sherry Farley, the question about who is the region, can you say what section you're referring to?
I believe, didn't it say someplace in there about they had to be approved by the region? Let me see. Revised current process for regional review. Who is the region? That, I think that was under your revisions 273.11.
Okay, thank you. By the region. So Angela, could you talk a little bit about how the different departments play different roles in a region? Just briefly.
Yes. As far as the regional director, what they normally do, and again, I can only speak for the region that I had worked in when I was in self-determination, but what would normally happen is that a tribe would submit their contract or their renewal contract to the region, and it would be received by the regional director, and then a 2-day acknowledgement letter will be developed and signed by the regional director and sent back out to the tribe. And then once the contract is approved, then that regional director will sign the letter and send back to the tribe stating that their contract has been approved or declined, whichever the outcome was. Now, as far as the education plans are reviewed and approved by the BIE staff that has been assigned as the awarding official's technical representative to look over that plan and approve it.
Thank you, Angela. I'm going to ask you to provide a little bit of information as well on something someone said earlier. I think it was Dr. Sherry Johnson. You had mentioned there were schools or entities in your area that were asking about how they could apply, and they're not a current, they don't receive current funds. Angela is collecting some information if that's something that you or they want to voluntarily share. Angela, could you talk a little bit to everyone about those that do not currently have a program but are interested in sending you information?
Yes. What I am doing is, for those that are out there that do not have a current JOM contract, then what I am doing is I'm going on ahead and collecting those student counts. However, whenever you send in those student counts for those that do not have a current contract, then if you could state on there that you do not have a contract currently, that would help me out, because if I get something and I go and I try to locate your tribe or your school, then I can't find it, then I'll have to send something back asking, well, what region are you in? You know, are you a subcontract to a tribe? And things like that. So to help eliminate the going back and forth of emails, then and save me time, if you could put that on there, that would, or even on the email, and when you send that in, that would help out too. Again, I am collecting those, and what I'm doing is I have a spreadsheet that I have started on non-contractors or future participants or something like that I have labeled. And so again, yes, I am collecting those and using those whenever we write our final report on those that are interested that currently do not have a contract. So if you want to, even though the deadline has passed on sending in those counts, I'm still collecting those.
Angela, can you also talk about if there's information on the information on the JOM website that they see that is not correct, that they can send the corrected information to you? This was any of the documents that are online now regarding the different regions and the types of contracts.
Oh, okay. Yeah, on the website, there is a PowerPoint presentation that is out there that we used in June 2019. I believe it's dated June 21st, 2019. And if you go through there and you, when you scroll down in the slides, there are the list of current contractors that are sectioned out by 638, 477, OSG, or public schools, and state departments. If you can go out there and if you look at that and you see that yours is not in the right place, then if you can email me and let me know that you're not a 477, which it's a workforce development. If you're not that, if you're 638, which is self-determination, or if you're OSG, which is Office of Self-Governance, then that would be helpful, so that way we can put your tribe or school in the right category.
There's a question in the chat box from Miss Mona Pedregon.
Yes.
Will National JohnsonOMalley Association have regional meetings regarding this information or the preliminary report, or will the regional BIE JOM director? So currently, internally, we are working on creating our processes and procedures for scheduling training, such as webinars.
Okay.
We have been in contact with the National Johnson-o'Malley Association. We are aiming to collaborate with that organization as we provide information to the field. We are also, our goal is also to reach out to the various departments within the BIA, such as the Office of Self-Governance, 477, Self-Determination, because we know information gets sent to the field in multiple ways. And so we're really trying to build our communication to the field and then build our processes and procedures for distributing training and information on this, on the whole act, and the preliminary report and the final report.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? I apologize for the blue screen. Just a reminder, the comments are due August 26th. And if you go to our website, if you forgot the address, it is on the BIE JOM website. If you search for this PowerPoint under the consultation documents, then you will find the presentation, and you can locate the email address, consultation@bia.gov is one of the shorter email addresses you can use to submit your comments. That's consultation@bia.gov. And again, the deadline is August 26th. The entire proposed rule is also on the website if you want to go through that section by section and provide comments after reviewing that again. Any other questions or comments?
Hi, this is Winona Wallace from the Organized Village of Saxon, and I'm the Tribal Administrator. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I had a minor comment to make. When I was looking at the Indian student eligibility, and it talked about requiring that they have Indian blood in addition to membership in a federally recognized tribe, and I think you've heard it nationally spoken that areas are not, fraternal organizations have membership, like the Eagles Club or the Moose Club, Lions Club. You're members of that. But we're all sovereign nations, and that we have citizenship. And so I wondered if the change of verbiage could be changed from membership to citizenship wherever you see tribal members or tribal membership. And then when it talked about reside or near an Indian reservation, in Alaska, the only reservation we have is in Metlakatla, Alaska, on the Net Island. And a lot of the tribal federally recognized tribes in Alaska are Indian Reorganization Act tribes. but we live in Alaska Native villages. So I wondered if there could be some insertion on that, speaking specifically to Alaska, reside on or near an Indian reservation or Alaska Native villages. Thank you.
Thank you, Winona. We definitely have your comments recorded and they will be reviewed. Winona, could you type your full name and the organization you're representing in the chat box?
I wasn't able, I told Angela, I was trying to email her this morning, and whenever I tried to get into the chat box, it told me that the chat box you requested could not be found. You may have used a link that is inactive or typed a web address incorrectly. And all I did was keep clicking on join to join. So,
okay. Thank you. Could you spell your last name?
It's W-A-L-L-A-C-E, and I'm from the Organized Village of Saxman in Saxman, Alaska. And I had another really, and I don't know if this is the proper place to ask, but I wanted to ask about the change in the 25% of the weight factor. That 25% number was changed to, I don't know if it was arbitrary, but it was changed to 1.3. And when I was using, just trying to randomly use numbers for our count, we have a low count of Alaska Native students in our village, and there's 89 of them. When I went through the formula using 25%, I had a higher number in terms of the funding that I would receive if I went through the formula correctly. And then when I used a 1.3 weight factor, I received less money. So is that what we're finding, is that there's a decrease in the funding when we use those two different type of formulas?
Yes. So I'm looking for that slide. I'm going to start to answer your question, and then if someone could chime in to help with the answer here. So that specific slide was referencing the fact that BIE was required to change that weight factor. And I'm looking for the year. Sorry, hold on. So it was the slide on the funding formula tries to explain why that weight factor was changed. In 1978, it says the education amendment required by the Secretary of Interior to develop alternative methods for the distribution of JOM funds. So at that time, they did ask for recommendations on the weight factor and the funding formula in the Federal Register. And based on those recommendations, there was a new formula based on a 1.3 weight factor that would be phased in. And so BIE was directed to use this weight factor. Now, as we're re-examining the funding formula, I would take this opportunity to recommend what you think is fair and appropriate, and submit that comment.
You're getting really bad feedback on your line. line.
Oh, I apologize. I'm not sure why it's echoing.
Thank you. I did have my phone muted, so I don't think it was on our end for the echo. I'm muting again. Thank you.
Okay, so I have a follow-up. This is Linda Austin. I'm calling with the Sled del Pueblo in El Paso, Texas. So on the slides, it was slide number 10 where it talks about the funding formula. Just to clarify, where the current rules funding formula, that the 25% of weight factor times the number of eligible Indian students, is that the proposed new formula?
No, the proposed formula is to use what is currently being used, which is the 1.3. And again, we were required to use that. So the proposed rule is to bring into alignment what is currently being done. So again, if you have a recommendation on what you think that funding formula and weight factor should be, this is the opportunity to submit that comment.
Yeah, I think you're just not, so I guess I'm just confused as to what does current rule funding formula mean?
So in the rule, originally it was 25%.
Okay.
And then,
This is Clint.
Okay, go ahead.
Go ahead. Well, I just want a clarification. So when you ask for the funding formula, you're trying to inquire what the current practice is in terms of funds distribution based on the student count?
Right.
Okay, so Maureen or Angela, maybe just discuss the existing funding formula. And then, yes, as Maureen mentioned, this is an opportunity for tribes and stakeholders to tell us if that funding formula should be changed, if it's not efficient any longer, and what the recommended proposal is for how we improve the funding formula. But Maureen or Angela, you can provide that background for the existing funding criteria.
Sure. Angela, maybe you can explain it better on slide 12, the proposed funding formula. And it says same that's been used. It's the same that's been used since 1988.
Right, and the reason why it was changed is because when you looked at the previous slide on the current rule, and whenever you do the calculation, and that calculation was way higher as you described, when you did the 20.25% versus the 1.3, which was lower, is the reason why is because on the 0.25, because that amount was so much higher that we weren't able to fund it at 100%. And then, and when it says it was phased in at the 1.3, it's phased in over 3 years. And when it was phased in, that gave tribes and those contractors a chance to adjust their budgets and how they were utilizing the funds, so that way it wasn't such a big decrease from the 0.25 to the 1.3. The 1.3 was a more, it was able to fund all the contractors at level funding versus the 0.25. So that's the reason why they went with the 1.3 versus the 0.25. The current rule is the 0.25, but because we've been using the 1.3, that's what's being proposed.
And I think that's still somewhat confusing, Angela. So maybe can you just discuss the weight factors and then why they came to what 1.3 was and why that's still the current process in terms of funding distribution?
Yeah, the 1.3, if you go back to slide 13, and it explains there on the how that 1.3 comes about. So if you use the 1.3 as a weight factor, and if for a tribe that may not have a 1.3 calculated out in this example, it's equaled at a 1.88. So that weight factor is going to be a 1.3 because no one has a weight factor of less than 1.3 whenever the calculation is being done. And so the 1.3 is being used to level off, sort of, better words, so that way everyone would be able to get what their level of funding is.
And for the caller, some background is that they were trying to come to a compromise in the 1980s on the funding distribution. And so what they were trying to do was take into consideration the highest cost of education in certain states, such as Alaska, that had higher costs than others, and really find different proposals that would work for those high-cost states to help these supplemental dollars kind of provide some of those education services. And so they did calls for comments and for proposals, and then sent it to Indian country to decide. And they never received a 51% majority from Indian country on which formula should go forward. So what happened was, by the late 80s, they came to a compromise funding formula that helped keep in the cost factor of 1.3 so that it still matched the higher need states, while still making sure that other portions of Indian country received the necessary supports that they needed. And so after that period, there were questions around the eligibility requirements, which leads into the funding criteria as well, because if you have different eligibility requirements, you'll be funding higher populations of Native students. So in the late 80s, Maureen mentioned this on her presentation, the department tried to constrict eligibility to 1/4 degree and a member of a federally recognized tribe. The court passed judgment down that that was too constrictive, that it needed to be 1/4 degree blood quantum or a member of a federally recognized tribe, which provides more service, more access to students utilizing the services under the program. And so that has been the common denominator going forward since that time of the court decision. So we've utilized that eligibility requirements and then based the funding on the student count at the time of 1995. Does that kind of help, or do you still need some more clarity?
I understand. I think my concern is now that, okay, let's say that tribes in their comment period and in what they're proposing for the funding formula, of course we're going to want to go for the higher case to yield more funding. But are we going to find ourselves in the same situation where there isn't going to be funds to be able to go around, and we find ourselves in the same boat?
And this is Clint. That's a very real possibility. But from what my understanding is, in creating the legislation, and from Native education advocates as they worked with legislators in Congress, was that, well, we've got to create a baseline that shows the need for such services, because in 1995, I want to say the annual appropriations was around $25 million a year, and now we're around 14-point-something million that Congress appropriates. And so the funds have decreased while Indian country population rates increase at higher rates than the rest of the country. So I think what Native education stakeholders, I don't want to speak for them, but from what I've heard, is that they said, well, we need to create a new baseline with the count. And sure, the count will be higher, so that could dilute the existing pool of funding, but we can't advocate for more funding until we actually show a higher need. So I think they were trying to move forward in that context. And then there's the reason why there's the hold harmless in the bill, so that if there is an increased need, that gives time for those same Native advocates as well as Indian country and tribes to advocate for more funding because they'll finally have the data that's needed to back up those calls for increased funding. That's my understanding.
Okay, okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I got that. Yeah, you got that. Okay. But why couldn't I save it to my phone? I'm muted.
Maureen,
Yes.
this is Dr. Sherry Johnson again. I have a couple questions. On the actual PowerPoint, it talked about in the section 3, you talked about question and answer format. What's that question and answer format? What do you mean by that? What's that?
Sure. So in the proposed rule, and if you look at the website and look at the actual proposed rule, the old format was more in summary paragraphs, and in the new format for each subpart and each section, I'm just going to read.
Is it the annual report? Are you talking annual report?
No, I'm talking about the proposed rule in the Federal Register.
Oh, okay,
So
okay. So that's for the actual rulemaking itself?
Yes. So, for example, in section 273.106, it says, what key terms do I need to know? So that's the question, and then the answer is terms used in this part, academic year.
Okay, thank you. And here's my next question, except we have music now.
Yes, could you mute your phone, please, if you have music?
Okay, I don't quite understand. Well, let me go to this other one first. 273.128. How are contracts prioritized? And then it talks about let's see, 49. Where's my 50? Okay, it talks about A and B. Majority of Indian students will be tribal members and serve on near students. What are these being prioritized for?
Can you say the section number again?
128.
.128.
It's on page 4950 of the advanced copy.
Okay. How are contracts prioritized? A, which would serve Indian students on or near reservations. B, where majority of the Indian students will be members of the tribe. Is that
what are they being prioritized? Yes, that's the correct one. What are they being prioritized for?
Well, I'm going to see if someone on the line can answer that.
This is Brenda. This is in regards to new contract proposals. It's under subpart E, new contract proposals. So how may new contracting party request proposals are eligible, and then it all leads up to how our contracts prioritized. So it's in regards to contract proposals.
So that doesn't make sense, because even if they have, it's so prioritized for a contract is what I'm assuming, but it doesn't make sense if they have to have the eligibility anyway. Then my other question is on 192. It talks about a new tribal resolution if the current one has expired or the terms do not address renewal. So in order to renew a contract, so that I'm assuming that for all of our programs. So normally with our 638 contracts, I usually write a clause in there that this resolution will be valid for 3 years, which is usually the length of the contracts that we have. But this one says a new tribal resolution. It doesn't give, is it annually? So every year we have to have a new tribal resolution?
This is Angela. On the tribal resolution, you're right. If you have your tribal resolution that is for 3 years, then that will be honored for 3 years. But then, as you have to renew your contract, and you'll have to send in a new tribal resolution. There are some tribal resolutions that are that continue on, that don't have no end date on them, and they can honor those as well. But it's just, different tribes, they do things differently. Not all are the same. And so an awarding official will have to have something to award a contract, because if they have an expired resolution, then they can't use that expired resolution to contract. That's that's what that is referring to.
So Angela, then it would be to our benefit that we have one perpetual until otherwise noted.
Yeah, you can do that.
Okay,
that's up to the tribe, if the tribe approves it.
Yeah. And then my next question is on section 194. It talks about, does the Indian Education Committee have authority to cancel contracts? I don't understand why you would give Indian Education Committee that authority. Wouldn't that be the tribe?
Right. Yeah. And that's that's a comment that you can submit on if you feel that it's the tribe, then putting your comment that the tribe has that authority.
And just to add, and Brenda, correct me if I'm wrong, but the .94 says the Indian Education Committee may recommend to the regional director cancellation. So I'm not sure, I don't think it specifies the committee has the authority to cancel, but it can recommend cancellation. Brenda, do you have clarification?
No, that's correct. It's simply that they can recommend cancellation or suspension if the contractor fails to permit the committee to exercise its powers and duties.
Okay, which I don't necessarily agree with, because I think that's a tribal responsibility, because they are the contractor, not the committee. Okay, and then my next comment or question is on, what is this section? 126. And it talks about, which is on page 49 of the advanced copy, the IV, and it goes under B1, and then there's a I until it gets to the Roman numeral 4, has at least 70% eligible Indian enrollment. So it's for these, this is in the new section that talks about who are eligible for contracts. So is this, am I reading this right, that they must have 70% Indian enrollment in the school?
is Maureen. It does say have at least 70% eligible Indian enrollment. And I'm looking at the section before it, such as B1, and I'm looking at the Federal Register proposed rule. It says a public school district is required to establish in the proposal that so the school district, it's referring to the school district to have at least 70% eligible Indian enrollment.
Which is a little different in this, the advanced copy for the tribal consultation. That's listed a little different than in the Federal Register then. And so my next question goes to Clint, which he talked about the hold harmless. So what does that do to the schools that have 50% or 50% or more Native students?
Well, are they running a JohnsonOMalley program?
Correct, they are.
Well, nothing changes for them because they're held harmless unless they don't meet the criteria that's specified in the law, which is, you know, they've got to provide their reporting information and whatnot, so that they provide us the information that's crucial for us to ensure that dollars are being appropriated accordingly to the local level. But the idea is that this hold harmless ensures that there won't be changes for those existing programs several years while advocates work to increase funding. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And then my next question, maybe to Angela. I see on 129, it talks about, and it also, Dr. Farley also talked about the regional director. And I see the regional director is kind of written in here with some authority all the way through for reporting and requirements. And I don't understand why was that through them rather than maybe the office of Angela?
Well, on the, as far as that right there, anywhere where the regional director is noted at, if you see that needs to be changed, then feel free to write in the comments that who you feel that those need to go to.
Yeah, and this is Clint. I just want to reiterate, you know, the things that have been proposed, these are all proposals that you're able to comment on during this comment period. So not only will we take the information that you're providing during this webinar, as well as that information that we're providing in the in-person sessions, but for those that comment formally during the comment period, we'll take that, compile it, put it into a consultation report so that we can synthesize that information and determine how to move forward based on the comments that were received.
Yeah, because Clint, that really doesn't make sense because he doesn't have the rest of the authority needed to act over there. He's also, you know, that's not his expertise, or whoever he or she, not their expertise. Rather, the JOM program itself should have all of those roles.
Okay.
But thank you.
Thanks for the comment.
And one more follow-up statement to that. This is Sherry Johnson again. That, you know, it just seems real odd that all of a sudden the regional director is written all the way through here, and yet Congress held the Bureau of Indian Education directly responsible for getting the JOM Modernization Act and the new count and everything else through. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
This is Sherry Farley from Cheyenne River. Under 273.130, the education plan approved by the Indian Education Committee. Is there a definition somewhere for education plan, or is that the application part of the plan? Or is it a whole different education plan? I guess I need more clarity on what education plan means.
Can you restate the section number?
273.130, D, small d.
I'm seeing that in 119.
119? Oh, okay. Okay, there it is.
On that education plan, this is Angela. The education plan, it's the same education plan that you currently turn in. It's just giving the outline of what it must include. So
This is Sherry Farley again. On 273.119, this education plan, I just need a clarification. Maybe it's in here somewhere. It says a prospective contractor in consultation. So this is for a new contractor?
well, I think what that might be referring to is if there was a new contractor that wanted to contract the JOM program, these are the requirements or what they must submit that needs to be included. However, for most programs that I have talked with, certain ones such as 638 or 477 or OSG, some of them require an education plan turned in every year and some don't. So it just varies from program to program on how they, you know, what they require on an annual basis or, you know, per contract.
And I would just add, this is Brenda, that in point 192, it just is for renewal that an existing contracting party seeking to renew a contract will submit the current education plan approved by the Indian Education Committee.
Can you give me the date of the Federal Register that published the original consultation? I need to look up that 70%.
The Federal Register is dated Thursday, June 27th, 2019. And if it helps, at the top it says volume 84, number 124.
Thank you.
Earlier in the session, we did mention the other webinars that will be held. So in case you want to read a section and submit comments, or read a section and then rejoin one of our webinars, you have that opportunity. We have an upcoming session this afternoon at 1 o'clock. Thursday, July 25th, another session at 9 a.m. and also one at 1 p.m. Thursday. Any other comments or questions?
This is Mona Petragon. The education plan, will there be a new format sent out to us, or do we continue using the same way that we were submitting it?
You will continue submitting as you have in the past.
Okay.
In the same format.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, so this is Clint. If we don't have any more questions or comments during this period, we're almost up to our 2-hour time period, and we can adjourn early if there's no further comments during this particular session. Has everybody had an opportunity to weigh in that wants to? Okay, then we'll take in that silence. As my predictor, we will formally adjourn this opportunity. And Maureen, if you want to go over the additional webinar sessions for consultation before we adjourn formally, we'll do that, and then we'll conclude this meeting. Thanks, everyone.
Yes. So on the BIE website JOM page, there are other links to the other sessions. So for each webinar, there's going to be a new link and a new conference call number that you have to use. So I would urge you to visit our website. Again, we have a session at 1 o'clock Mountain Time today. And then we also have a session, 2 sessions on Thursday, July 25th. The morning session starts at 9 a.m. Mountain Time, and it will run just as it did today in terms of the presentation. And then also at 1 o'clock, Thursday, July 25th, we will have our final webinar. We will be presenting the same information in each webinar.
Okay, everyone. Well, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to provide comments and review the proposed information. We look forward to your comments within the prescribed comment period.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.